Hello KeenGamers and welcome to another hardware review. Today we're checking out Thrustmaster's TX Racing Wheel Leather Edition. So let's get started. Video games can only reach so far. Despite graphical updates, ray tracing, and higher resolutions, there will always be a disconnect between player input and the actions taking place on screen. In racing games, turning a thumbstick left and right simply does not translate the power and force of a car into one's sense of touch. Thrustmaster has provided their solution to solve the problem of the disassociation between player input and game action. The TX Racing Wheel Leather Edition is a luxurious and elegant piece of hardware, its sole purpose to bring you closer to the action. The unboxing experience begins with the racing wheel on top, surrounded by protective foam. Next comes the base and accessories, including the cords and desk mount. Finally, the pedal assembly, which includes 3 pedals. The TX Racing Wheel makes great first impressions. The leather is soft and the stitching is well done. The irony did not take long to hit me that this gaming steering wheel felt nicer and better built than the one in my actual car. The brushed aluminum frame and paddle shifters give the wheel a solid, weighty character. It gives the idea that this was made for and can handle consistent use. The TX Racing Wheel is not simply hardware that controls your vehicle's actions on screen. It is also reactive, responding to road conditions, speed, and your vehicle's control. For example, if on a dirt road, the wheel will resist your control just like a real car would. Vibrations and counter movements made by motors inside the base simulate the physics of real-world driving. It does all this through the use of a dual belt system connected to a latency-free servo, a contactless magnetic sensor with over 65,000 sensor values, and a 900-degree rotation angle. The buttons on the wheel face are formatted after the Xbox. Microsoft console owners will be immediately familiar with the ABXY setup, although the buttons are split between the two sides, with X and Y being accessible by one's left thumb and A and B by one's right thumb. There's a directional pad as well located on the left side of the wheel. Otherwise, navigating through menus would be a pain by turning the wheel left and right. There's also a switch that can act as multiple buttons on the bottom right of the wheel. Finally, there's 2 buttons on the lower left that operate as option and menu buttons. The base is heavy, even without the wheel, and it's understandable as there is a lot going on inside. There's motors, pulleys, and the system's power supply to weigh it down. There's a reasonable chance that the TX base will be the most substantial piece of hardware on your desk, and I'd make sure one's desk is sturdy enough to support the weight and clamp force needed to keep it in place. The base material is hard plastic with vents for airflow to keep the motor inside cool. The clamp used to secure it in place is simple to install and easy enough to tighten. It's just a single screw to turn and has adjustable feet to ensure good contact with the desk. The pedal assembly is sizable as well, and it provides a space for one's feet to rest on while using the pedals. The wide foot pedal base also spreads out the force to help keep the pedals from slipping while on the ground. I found the pedal spacing to be accurate and the pedal resistance to be appropriate, and I did utilize the included but optional rubber cone for the brake pedal. This gives the pedal a firmer feel and increases the pressure necessary for braking as you brake harder. For those who have racing simulator chairs and frames, both the wheelbase and the pedals come with mounting holes in the bottom. Installation of the wheel was fairly simple. The wheel must be aligned between the plastic tabs on the inside of the steering column to ensure that the connection is correct. Once the wheel is placed on the column, a tightening mechanism on the base is turned to pull the wheel into place. A screw is tightened to prevent the fastener from reversing or becoming undone. And this was the only thing that I found a bit awkward about the installation. The screw sticks far out of the neck of the column even after it is tightened. Fortunately, it's not easily seen as it is usually out of sight, but for those who do spot it, it looks a bit strange and unfinished. Connecting the other parts together is an easy task. The foot pedal has a proprietary connector with a cord length that I found to be plenty long enough to connect to the wheelbase. The base itself has its own proprietary power cord and attaches through a USB cable to either one's Xbox or PC. Owners of the TX Racing Wheel Leather Edition must be wary about damaging the proprietary cables the base and pedal assembly use. The one from the pedal assembly especially. It's not detachable from the assembly, and while there is a track for the cord to run through to prevent damage, it could easily become pinched without being noticed. This would mean the purchase of an entirely new pedal assembly instead of a simple cord. So how does all this hardware come together? In a word, excellently. The driving experience certainly rises above that of a controller. In fact, driving games become a more intense, distinct adventure altogether. The fun of the TX racing wheel is not only in the accuracy of input to action, but also in learning the nuances of the system. One will find that the way they drove before no longer works as well when behind the physical wheel of their virtual vehicle. One might find that a different camera angle needs to be used, or change tactics on how to take that tricky turn. When using a controller, the disconnect between mind, control, and action makes racing games more casual. When behind the TX racing wheel, racing becomes more impactful. Driving is no longer felt through the numb thumbsticks of the controller. The road, corners, and impacts can be felt through the force feedback of the steering wheel. Your feet, meanwhile, are using the pedals just like they would a real vehicle instead of the triggers on your controller. The entire system comes together in a way that feels as close to driving as possible. Because the sensation is similar to actually driving, the thrill is even greater, and the consequences of losing control of one's vehicle seems even more critical than other input methods. The comfort of the steering wheel is outstanding. The leather wheel has just the right amount of padding, but not so much as to feel mushy. Premium materials are what makes the TX Leather Edition stand out over others, and it doesn't disappoint. Everything about the wheel itself feels like luxury, from the leather to the aluminum frame to the subtle yellow stripe to indicate which way is up. The resistance made by the force feedback does an excellent job at providing a realistic experience, but does not hinder steering. Despite pulleys and motors connected to the wheel, the drag made by the components during gameplay is barely noticeable. When the feedback does kick in, it syncs up perfectly with what's happening in-game. Some games utilize the feedback differently though, so switching between games can be a bit jarring, quite literally, if one is not prepared for the torque change. I played several games which were all compatible with the controller, including Forza Horizon 4, Need for Speed Heat, and Dirt 5, and all three were substantially improved by the TX racing wheel. In Forza Horizon, the cars are beautifully crafted and their performance accurate to their specifications. And despite all the different types of cars and their behavior, the wheel was able to keep up the realism. From driving antique roadsters to Bugatti Veyrons, the TX racing wheel felt at home in any of their interiors. In Need for Speed Heat, which tends to have a more arcadey approach to driving, the TX racing wheel didn't miss a beat. In Dirt 5 on Xbox, the force feedback really shone. Every water-filled mud puddle could be felt in the TX racing wheel. The transfer of the rocky digital road into tactile vibrations is really neat. However, the game which pushed the torque of the wheel to its limits was Wreckfest. Controlling a car in the junkyard racing game was all but a workout to keep the car on track, and you can't help but smile while fighting the wheel. It seemed no matter what game or what road condition those games threw at it, Thrustmaster didn't fail to make it a more dynamic and immersive experience. Playing on PC was not quite plug and play like it was on the Xbox. There were some drivers that needed to be installed, and some games required drivers that were not by Thrustmaster at all, which was interesting. However, most half-savvy computer owners will be able to sort out the necessary software. And there was one thing I missed in my experience with the TX racing wheel, and that was a manual shifter. But despite it not being included, it does come with a 3-pedal assembly that includes a clutch pedal, so it's shifter ready if one wishes to purchase the shifter separately. For those who want a bridge between the automatic and manual transmission, there's always the paddle shifters, which give a satisfying clunk when pulled. It should also be mentioned that on PC, the buttons in-game are not referred to by their physical letters which show on the wheel. For example, the A button on PC would be referred to as button 5. This can be disorienting when trying a new game or getting used to the wheel before all the button numbers are memorized. There's a mapping of the buttons and their numbers in the included manual, however, looking up a button mapping mid-game when prompted to do something is impossible and requires a bit of memorization. The button profiling being what it is, the buttons themselves are excellently spaced on the wheel, and I understood quickly why Thrustmaster split up the buttons between the two sides. Due to the way one's hands hold a steering wheel, 4 buttons on one side would have been too crowded. Splitting them up was a smart choice for hectic driving, when one needs to quickly activate an ability, e-brake, or switch fuse. Overall, Thrustmaster's TX Racing Wheel Leather Edition would be my choice of device when exploring simulator hardware options for racing games. There were some software roadblocks which needed just a tiny bit of research to overcome, but once the TX racing wheel is working, the premium leather wheel, force feedback, and vibration all come together in a realistic way that rivals the real experience. For those who enjoy racing games and want the most genuine driving feel, they need to look no further. If you have liked what you've seen in this video, then a product link will be included in the video description down below. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe to KeenGamer for more reviews just like this one.